Good morning and welcome to our life program. My name is Rachel Hugenberg. I'm a reference librarian at Lone Star Sci-Fair, and we are here this morning, and I'm really excited about this, with Mandy Ross, the creator of Paper of the Past. She started this Instagram in 2016, and it's an Instagram of scrapbooks that she has collected that date from 1840 to 1940. Her scrapbooks and her Instagram have been featured in Frankie Magazine, Reclaim, Upper Class Encyclopedia of Inspiration, Ephemera, and Period Living. She happens to have a master's in kinesiology and a master's in information and communication studies. And part of the reason why we're so honored to have her here today is because it is National Scrapbooking Month.
I'm excited to spend a little bit of this morning with you talking about scrapbooks and some of the things I've collected over the years. Let's see, what I want to talk about today, I'm going to start out giving a brief introduction of Paper of the Past. Some of you may have seen my account already, but maybe you haven't. So let's talk about that. And then what we'll do is go through popular scrapbooking styles, like roughly by decade. We're going to look at 1880s through 1890s. We'll take a look at 1910 through 1915, and then we'll get to the 1920s. And I'd like to go further, but I think that's a good range for today's talk. And then we'll end with a Q&A session. So if you think of any questions, feel free to ask. So a little more about me. I do collect scrapbooks made by other people, and they're generally from 1840 to 1940. And I found my first scrapbook in around 2007, and since then I have probably a little over 500 scrapbooks. So it's a big hobby and obsession of mine, and it was always something I really enjoyed alone, and I would try to show people here and there, mostly by carrying things around. So I would take something and bring it to a friend's house and say, look what I found, look what I found, you know. And that sharing process wasn't very efficient. But in 2016, I thought, you know, I want to show these books to more people. There just has to be more people out there that wants to see these. So in 2016, I started my Instagram account, and I didn't really know what to expect, but it did gain some popularity pretty quickly. And over the last 5 years, there's this really nice community of like thousands of people who enjoy the books, you know, as much as I do, who like to talk about them and, you know, share their own stories and things like that. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I have been, me and Paper of the Past have been featured in a few magazines and a book. And I like to say that because it's nice for me to see the scrapbooks get like recognition and interest, because on one hand, they're a little bit of an underdog. I see them get discarded a lot. You know, that's how I'm able to buy them. But then on the other hand, there's this audience and interest from people across the world, really, who come to the scrapbooks for different reasons. So over the years, I've seen people like the scrapbooks to get inspiration for their own work or their own art. Some people aren't creating anything at all, but they enjoy the history and the nostalgia and just that like time capsule excitement of seeing what's in the book. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'll give a little bit more context for the presentation today. I wanted to point out that a lot of what I say, a lot of this presentation is based on my observations of my own collection. So really that's coming from looking at scrapbooks just about almost every day for over 5 years and living with hundreds of books. But I'm not I'm not a historian, and I haven't seen all the scrapbooks in the world. I'm going to try, you know, but really this is more my observation from what I've seen through my collecting process and all of that. Almost all of the books I'm going to show today do come from the United States. That's kind of limited to like what I'm able to buy, what I see, you know, what will ship to me. So it's not necessarily like a a worldview or international outside of the United States. Also, the books are made by other people. Sometimes people, when they first come to my account or see what I do, they think that maybe I'm making the books using old material, but that's not true. They are books made by other people, and I don't alter them or change them in any way. And then anything I share today and anything I share on my account does come from my collection. So they're here, with me. And, one day I'd like to travel around and maybe share books from archives and libraries and things like that, but I haven't done that yet. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We are going to start with scrapbooks from the 1880s and 1890s. And what I want to do is share some common features that I come across very often. But I'm going to say this a lot. There are no scrapbooking rules. So there are things that were more common or more in style, but pretty much everything I say, there are examples to go against that commonality, I guess. So what I want to do is share a few of those common things and then change it up and say, yeah, but here are some really unique examples that don't fit that criteria at all. So we'll start with this time period and kind of move on through different decades. Starting with the first thing that I usually see with these scrapbooks from this time period would be they're often in large hardcover books with really ornate covers like you see here. These books were made specifically for scrapbooking. Even though the covers are really nice, the pages were usually blank, like totally blank, and made for people to save their scraps and things in. I have another example on the next slide showing how sometimes the spine is really pretty as well. And these are big, heavy books. I'm going to hold one up real quick, but I don't even think it will make it into the frame. But something like this is what I think of if someone said, "Oh, I have a 1890s scrapbook," I'm thinking of something like this. But of course, they come in different sizes, and we'll see that people use different types of books as well. But that's the first feature. Let's go ahead and move on to feature 2. Let's see. Yeah, feature 2, which is actually something that I typically don't see in this time period. And what I notice is there's very minimal to no handwriting or captions in books from the 1880s to 1890s. Now, what you see in the photos here are examples of just like a little bit of text, usually in the inside front cover or on the first page. So the one on the left is just the person's name, Fanny M. Minor. Her name shows up a couple times throughout the book. In the middle, we have more of like this. Well, this book was given as a gift. And I don't know if you can read it, but I'll read to you what it says. So that scrapbook in the middle says, Helen Stiegwald, 1899, presented by grandmother. The grass is green, the rose is red. Here is my name when I am dead, Grandma Wortman. So, okay, we see that, something like that, somewhat often, but that is the only text throughout the entire book. The one on the right, let's see. Yeah, the one on the right just has like some name information. Anna Lewis, made in October, November, and December of 1881. Let's go to the next slide. So if there is writing inside, what usually will be there, if we're lucky, I'm hoping to at least get this information. We'll see the person's name, the date it was made, sometimes the location, maybe a city. If it was given as a gift, it's common to see that to and from information. And then less common, what I'll see sometimes is that notes will be added later. So somebody, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road goes in and writes a few handwritten notes in that book, kind of explaining where it came from. And I know you can't see the text really in the image on the left, but I'll read what it says. It says, this book was the property of Miss Electa Elizabeth Leah Jennings, given to her on a Christmas tree at the First Liberty Chapel Church by her husband, Cyrus B. Jennings, sometime before 1895. And then it says written by Estella B. Whitman. So I'm thankful that that Estella wrote that in there, because if she hadn't added that note, there would be nothing in the book to say where it came from or who made it. Let's go ahead and move on to the third feature, which is common, and this is the most obvious one. Of course, in scrapbooks from this time period, we see a lot of scraps, a lot of trade cards, and a lot of calling cards. Now, trade cards were advertisements that were really popular during that time period. They were given away for free, very colorful and interesting, and people like to collect them over time and put them in scrapbooks and albums like these. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Here you see two examples, both using scraps and things like that. The scrapbook on the left is one of my favorites, and you can see that the person really was really meticulous with their arrangement. And what I like about this book is that every page is this detailed and this full, edge to edge, front and back on every page, and it's very pretty. On the right, we see maybe a more typical arrangement, which is a little bit more like systematic, maybe on a grid pattern. These are actually pretty, on the right, they're pretty close together for what I usually see, but just two examples of a person from a similar time period, technically doing the same thing, but with different style and different arrangement. So let's go ahead and move on. And I'll just point out a couple things that are less common. And the reason this is important is because it's really going to contrast with scrapbooks that come later. So less common in these books would be any type of layering of scraps. It does happen, I'm going to actually show you examples of that. But when I see it, I'm surprised. It's like there was something, they did not want to overlap anything in most cases. It's rare for me to see them cut up a trade card. So if you look at the example on the left, I rarely see somebody maybe like cut out the flowers of the trade card and discard it. Instead, they were kept usually in their rectangular shape and glued down as is. Now the scraps had shapes. Those were used like in that way, but the trade cards were usually not cut up. And then again, very rare to see a lot of handwriting. So they were saving things from their daily life, but not necessarily explaining like the context or relationship to them or where they got it or why they saved it or anything like that. But let's go ahead and move on. With all of that in mind, looking at a few common features, I'm going to spend the next like 6 or 7 slides looking at some unique examples from this time period where they didn't follow, the typical style. And these are the scrapbooks that I really like to find. I'm always looking out for these, but they come around once a year, a couple times a year in terms of what I see for sale. So let's go ahead and check out that first one. This one was made by Sadie Hudson in the 1890s. And you can see from this first page that we're not dealing with the typical style, right? There actually aren't any scraps, trade cards, or calling cards in this book. Instead, it's all filled with things like, well, there's a few photos, but you also see ribbons, letters, little tickets from games that they played, lots of handwriting, and just a lot of neat things to see. This is one of my favorite books. Let's go ahead and look at another page from her book, so still Sadie's book. On this one, you can see little trinkets. Everything is dated. Everything says where it came from. There's a little piece of like whittled wood. Even the wood has writing on it. And then the upside down heart that you see is actually folded up. It says it's a Valentine, I think from 1894. So I like that bright, vibrant color. And again, things that I don't always see in these books that I'm looking through. We have one more slide from her book, and this is just showing that she had a little envelope glued to the page, and when you look inside that envelope, there's another envelope, and inside that envelope is a little memento with a lock of hair, and I thought that was really cool. And we see this like envelope inside envelope style in maybe in the 1920s, but it's not common in 1880s, 1890s. So I like to wonder, why I wonder why she made her book this way, and not in the traditional style. Let's move on to the next example, and this is from Renee Dozier from the 1890s. Now, her book, she didn't use an ornate, fancy book or album. Instead, she took a lined school notebook and used it for her scrapbook, and she called this book her memoir, MEMOR. And she refers to the book many times, like throughout the pages. So you can see on this page here, she saved a paper doll, and it says playing paper dolls 1898. In the right hand corner, you can see little twigs, and she said coming from Sunday school. So just twigs that she picked up on her walk home. Also cute in the bottom right hand corner, like a little piece of tree bark, and it says, if this bark could speak, Ellie and myself up in the tree, and it says 1892, 1893, 1894, all the way to 1899. I have a couple more slides from her book. Let's go ahead and look at the next images. You can see she's liked to save buttons. There's a matchstick on the far left. She saved little pieces of fabric. If you look on the far right, that really bright red piece of material, it says, this is a piece of Guy Carlton's tie that he gave me for my memoir. So what I think is cute is sometimes you can tell that the people around this person were actively saying like, here, I know you want something for your book. Here you go. Here you go. You can tell that this was something she put a lot of thought and time into making, and I'm glad that it has survived as long as it did. Let's go ahead and go to the last image from this book, just once again showing how she saved all kinds of different items, not just paper items. The little kind of the metal pin in the left-hand corner, it's a hairpin, and it says, I wore this in my hair the night of the serenade, 1899. So how cool is that? It just, some of these books really do feel like a time capsule when you're going through all the pages and seeing like little treasures on just about every page. So that's two examples of scrapbooks from this time period that are different from usual. I have a couple more styles that I see often. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about cloth books or scrapbooks made out of fabric. You can see an example of that here on this slide. And so these are made in so many different ways using different material, they're bound in different ways. But in this example, it's pretty much like tied together. You can see the spine on the right-hand side. So it's big pieces of some kind of material. I don't know what it is, and they're tied together. And then the scraps and the trade cards and things like that are just glued down onto the fabric. Let's look at the next one, the next cloth book here. This one is interesting. I haven't seen this design again or since this one, but in this example, the material is folded like an accordion. So it's an accordion book. It's using like a repurposed book for the covers. So it's a novel called All About April. That's on the front and back. But you can open this book and it will open up. It's just one long piece of material that's folded. And then that makes the pages. The pages are used front and back. And it's a little bit of a smaller book. You can see in the images, those are calling cards mostly. And so the person just arranged those calling cards and scraps on each page. So this is one, like they really did something interesting with this design. Let's go ahead and look at the last example of cloth books. On this slide, I'm showing 3 different cloth scrapbooks, but it's also showing how scalloped edges were pretty popular with these. You can see that on all 3. Now, a lot of times what I see with these cloth ones is that they were made by adult family members for children. Not always, but that is pretty common to see them given as gifts. So in that case, they're completely made, all the scraps are in there, and then it's a nice book to give to a child because they can't really tear, they can't tear the pages or anything. They're somewhat indestructible, as you can see from the ones here that have survived, but I'm sure many, got worn down. Let's keep on going. So we're still talking about unique examples from the 1880s and 1890s. The next example I have is when people use repurposed or reused books. So that's when the book was initially used for something different. So maybe it was a business ledger or a catalog from a company, and they took that book and said, this is a scrapbook now, and they just pasted things over that original content in the book. And the one you see here, this is a 1870s business ledger, but that was passed on, and then a young girl used it as her scrapbook. In this case, yes, there is like technically a lot of handwriting in the book, but the handwriting is like secondary. It's just old financial information, inventories, calculations, things like that. And you can see some of that writing kind of peeking through the scraps on the different pages. I think I have, let's look at one more slide of this one. The one on the left is my favorite page from this book. I think that cat looking in the mirror is so cute. And you also get to see, she did write her name underneath the image. And on the left-hand side, on the left page there, you see like, for whatever reason, she didn't add any scraps or anything to that page. So you see the business information. I have a couple more examples of repurposed books. So on the next slide, you'll notice that most of these books are my favorite. So I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to pick. But this is also one of my favorite books, also made in a old business ledger. This is a tall and skinny book. I've only seen this shape, I guess, and style a couple times, made by Minnie Woodbury. And not only is it a repurposed book, but she layered a lot, right? Lots of layering, lots of cutting things up, lots, like you can see the little like square shapes that she cut out or rectangle shapes. She liked to cut out individual letters, and she mixed the scraps with like news articles or newspaper or magazine articles or things like that. But there's no writing in this book besides the old business ledger writing that is just happens to be on the pages. If we look at this slide, it's a few more examples from her book, which you can see her. I love her her layout and the colors and what she chose to include. Very cool. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites. Now, I have one more example on the next slide. This is also a repurposed book. This is my last example for this time period. But what's different about this one is it's a 1860s scrapbook that somebody took over later in time, 1880s or something like that, and made it their own scrapbook by just pasting things over the original scrapbook content. This is a I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that because I really want to know what's the original 1860s content in there because it's covered, right? So I get kind of like peeks, little things here and there, but yeah, somebody repurposed a scrapbook. And it wasn't done in modern times, this was done in, like I said, around the 1880s. So really it just goes to show any book, if it's paper, if it has anything that even resembles pages, it could potentially be a scrapbook, and that's true for today as well as back then. Okay, let's move on. We just went through a lot of stuff, and we spent a lot of time looking at those 1880s and 1890s scrapbooks, different examples of what was common and also some unique things as well. What is interesting to me is looking at those styles and then asking what comes next. What happens? How does the style or how does the themes change over time? So we're going to spend a little less time kind of moving through the other dates or other decades. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And we are going to talk about 1900 to 1915. Now, these dates are not set in stone. There's no rule book or anything that says, officially 1900 we start doing this, or 1899 we do this. It's just more of like a general observation that I've had. But I see 1900 and 1915 as this interesting transitional period where there's like the older style and it's merging with like a newer style. And a lot of this is going to have to do with what's changing in printing technology and advertising and what's available. So as magazines become more popular, we see more magazine content. As photos become more available, we see more photos. So there's a lot of reasons why these changes would occur. But in today's talk, I'm mostly pointing out what changes and what that looks like. So 1900, 1915 is a transitional time, and you can see a very nice and cool scrapbook on this slide. This was made in 1902. It comes from Kentucky, but there is no writing in here, no information. I don't know yet who made it, and maybe I never will, I don't know, but I'm hopeful still. What you see is a lot of or more collage, more cutting things out, definitely layering, which was less common, 10, 20 years, 30 years before, whatever. And you also see the use of photos. This is also a repurposed book. It is a very large tailoring catalog that I've seen a couple times. And anyway, the person took it over and made a very beautiful scrapbook. Let's go ahead and look at another page on the next slide. You can see just a lot of color and a lot of cutting things out to kind of fit the layout that the person wanted. So instead of like a systematic grid layout, it's more of a collage style. So yeah, very pretty. Lots of nice pages in this book, and very happy to have it. And I really hope that I figure out who made it. I cannot believe it, that. Anyways, we'll see. Let's take a look at the next example. from 1900, 1915. This one is interesting because this is it seems to be a 1910 scrapbook made in an 1890s album. So if this book was closed, it just looks like that large, ornate Victorian traditional album that I showed in the beginning. But the person filled it with things from mostly the 1910s. And it doesn't seem like I think the person got it. It was predominantly blank, so I don't necessarily consider it a repurposed scrapbook from that time because most of the content is from the 1910s, and it doesn't look like they took anything out. Another thing that is cool about this book, if you see the kind of there's something taped in the bottom of the right image. That's just a complete handwritten letter, and it says, letter written to my aunt Luella Conway, 1886. So this person seems to be really interested in like historical items, maybe from the 1880s. Just here you go, full letter. It's from 1886. It's going in my scrapbook. Yeah, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide to see a little bit more from this book. So once you turn the page and get further in, you can see that it's there's a lot of photos, a lot of handwritten captions explaining what these items are, and just overall a really interesting blend of some 1890s stuff moving into like a newer, more personalized style of scrapbooking. I have a couple more examples, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. In this one from around 1915, Annie, she just filled every page. It's very layered. There is a lot of handwriting. She also did something interesting of she would cut out like captions and things from newspapers or magazines, like different words, and make captions with that text. She used a lot of humor, which I see that kind of humorous cut out captions and stuff. I see that more often in the 1930s, but she was way ahead of her time and made this book around 1915. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide to see another example of her work. It's not always easy to understand. It's like a combination of very visual, but she uses pieces of postcards and letters and things that people wrote to her, cut those up and added those to the page. Really what's going on here is each page seems to be about a man in her life and kind of like a dating record almost. And then you can tell who she liked and who made her mad. And if they made her mad, they got a pretty, angry page in her book. Let's go ahead and check out the next example. This is my last example for this time period, 1900, 1915. And this one, it is a repurposed book, but most of the scraps that you see on the pages come from cut up postcards. So this person went through and like meticulously cut out these postcards, just any little detail, little flowers or people or animals, cut those out and made these pages using an old children's book. So there's printed text underneath everything, but sometimes you don't really see it because they really covered it, edge to edge. It is organized by holiday. So you see Easter here, but there's also other ones, for 4th of July and a few Christmas pages and things like that. If we go to the next slide, you can see another example from this book. From what I can tell, the postcards were all sent to the same family between 1907 and 1913 because some of them are loose and some of them are coming off the page. So when you turn over the scraps that are loose, there you can see the handwriting, the postmarks, addresses, and things like that. All right, let's go on to the next slide. And we are kind of getting closer to the end. But the point I want to make next is that by the 1920s, a more popular style shows up, and it kind of dominates the rest of the books that I tend to see from the 1920s. So we had this transitional period, 1900 1915. If I get a book from that time, I don't really know what style I'm going to get. But if I buy a book from the 1920s, there are things that I just totally expect to see because they are popular and common. Let's look at a few examples from the 1920s. Look at the next slide. In this example from 1926, the person put an entire paper hat. This is from New Year's Eve, 1926. So they even saved some confetti from that celebration, put the confetti in the book. In my mind, there was some kind of memo that went out in the 1920s that just said, put it all in the book. If you like it, it goes in the book. The book doesn't have to close. It doesn't matter. If it's a rock, put the rock in the book. I've seen turkey wishbones. Somebody put a saltine cracker. If you like the cracker, it can go in the scrapbook. That's what we see happening in the 1920s. Not always, but more common. If we go to the next slide, we can see another example of that. This one from 1928, and it's just a little bit of everything, including a bra. Okay, there's just if you flip through this book, you get to a page and there's just this very thin bra tucked in. So it's not glued down or anything, but it's in there, along with looks like a pressed flower. I see a little rose maybe on the left-hand side. We have invitations, letters, notes, tally cards, and anything else, right? Anything else you wanted to put in there. Let's take a look at the next slide with another example using this similar, 1920s style of fill the book up. The book does not have to close, okay? Here, Genevieve, so much layering that you let inside the envelopes on the right page. There's a little scraps from Valentine's Day. You can see a little, I'm pointing, but you can't see me point. Let me see. You can see little letters as hair, hair from her friends, and on the, so I don't know where I got cut off, but really what I like to share about this one is that it is very layered. And I mentioned that sometimes it's so layered that you can't see the original layer. Like if you notice the letter on the left-hand side, it's pretty covered up, and there's things just glued almost right over on top of that letter. But let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I know we're getting close to the end, but I only have a couple of slides left. We have a few more pictures from the 1920s. If you see on the far left, the person put a little plastic doll. Wasn't too worried if the doll was smashed or not. It goes in. It's from 1928. A little bit to the right of that doll is a wooden clothespin. So, I've seen people use safety pins, clothespins, all kinds of things to like attach something larger to the page. And then to the far right is just a different view of a book that is so full that it doesn't close. And I think, yeah, I have this one right here and I'll hold it up. I don't know if people can see, but it looks like that. So just a normal book that would normally close all the way, but she filled it up so much that it's packed. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So over time, we see the styles go from a little bit flatter, a little more limited on what's included, really limiting it to those paper items like trade cards and calling cards and scraps. But over time, we see a transition when we get to the 20s. By the time we get there, just this use of a lot of material, a lot of handwritten captions, very personalized, and this idea of including anything and everything. Anything from the dolls to food items. Unfortunately, sometimes people save like chocolate covered almonds and things like that. It's kind of strange. But anyway, it's a cool transition there. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I don't want to talk about this too much because I do want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'll just leave it to everybody to think about, what styles are popular now. And quickly, I see things from different decades showing up in all the different styles that we have now, whether it's 1890s or 1920s. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is my contact information for anybody who wants to check out my website. Follow me on Instagram at Paper of the Past. If you go to my website, you can join my email list. If maybe you're not on Instagram or you want more, you want like one newsletter a week with photos and things like that, you can go to paperofthepast.com to sign up for that. But what do you think? You think we should take some questions since we're coming up to the end of our time?
I do think some questions would be great. I'm just going to look through the chat really quick here to see what's come up while we're discussing some things. Regina said they are all stunning. I feel like we should see these in pieces of unique art and history in museums. I think this is about the scrapbook with the bra in it, that it is next level scrapbooking.
I'm impressed with it.
Brad has said that he finds the dating record scrapbook interesting. I wonder why she chose to immortalize all the men in her life.
Yeah, she was really ahead of her time and kind of not anti, but she wasn't in a hurry to get married. So there's these notes from her family basically saying like, one day you'll get married and that's what, you have to do. And she's kind of more like, not really, I don't know. So it's a really cool book, really cool.
If I may interject, I have to say about that scrapbook, I'm sure she did not foresee her scrapbook being shown to the world on Instagram or on eBay or in a presentation like this. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of these people considered that these scrapbooks were like their diaries and they would remain private. So that's something to think about.
Right. Or the people that made her mad and got a little bit of a negative commentary, who would have thought that that would last over 100 years, They should have rethought their actions.
Right.
It's so fun to see some of the drama of the past just literally unfold on the pages. We do have a question about storage and preservation of these scrapbooks. Is there anything in particular that you do?
Well, what's really important to me is just to keep them, they're not out in the open. So I do keep most of them in scrapbook boxes. And so the hard part for me is they're not displayed. So really, if I want to see them, I kind of go to Instagram. Like I look at my own account to see the books. But yeah, just keeping them closed, in an enclosed environment where they're not experiencing a lot of different fluctuations in temperature. Yeah, there's more I could say, but they're put away and they're kept pretty safe.
We have another question on where did you manage to acquire these?
Yeah, that's a common question that I get, and really, so I get most of them on eBay, and really my luck comes from looking every day. So it's not really where I look, but how often. And so looking pretty much every day for 5 years is how I found these. Yeah, they come up every once in a while, but it's a lot of luck and a lot of looking often. They are sold anywhere vintage items are found. So whether that's a website or an estate sale, garage sale, even Goodwill, they come up sometimes, strangely enough.
So what made you decide to start collecting these?
I always loved books as a child and history and things like that. I like the idea of time capsules and history. And I started out collecting old postcards. So I would go, at a young age and pick, the nice handwritten messages I like the most. When I found my first scrapbook in 2007, it was like a big game changer for me, because if I'm looking for a story, scrapbooks have the biggest, or the most amount of story told in paper, told in book form, and they are like time capsules. So just kind of, well, not kind of, I did get hooked, and I'm learning that it's not a phase. I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon.
Do you have a personal favorite scrapbook out of all of them?
Really, the ones that I showed, most of the ones I showed today would be in my top 10. I really like to see, I like when it's a unique style for the time period, whatever that means for that given book, just because I like the human creativity behind it, the thought that the person sat down and how did they come up with this idea. And it's cool that they did something a little bit unique and different. I really like Renee's book, in the lined notebook, and that tall, skinny Victorian book is one of my favorites too.
We've been asked, what did you do with the food in the scrapbooks?
Well, in that example, the almond fell out, and I didn't keep it because it did not look good, and it was melting, and it was not a good situation. So I did not leave that specific chocolate covered almond in the book. Yeah.
Junk journaling and art journaling are popular today. Do you scrapbook or junk journal?
I started my first scrapbook actually in 2020, so that's its own, story, but I'm glad that I did, because the process, and it's a little bit more, it's like a journal scrapbook. It's really hard. Like what's the difference? We could talk about that for a whole nother session, but yeah, I started my first scrapbook in 2020, and I really enjoy it. It's really cool.
Gosh, what a year to start scrapbooking. Did you have a favorite piece of ephemera that you have from this past year?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I started the book in January 2020 with like a very different expectation of what this book would have for that year. And then it really turned into more of like a, pandemic experience, but it's interesting to see that transition from, January 26th, 2020 onward. So I do think if the book lasts 100 years, I think it'll be a good one if it, makes it that long.
I was just thinking about that. This is a really unique form of pandemic journaling, which is really popular right now, and what people might see in the future in your awesome scrapbooks. Earlier, we were comparing the scrapbooks of the 19th and 20th century to our social media feeds of today.
So, sorry, what was the question?
It's more of a comment, which is earlier we were talking about the scrapbooks of the 19th and 20th centuries and how they're a lot like our social media feeds now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting to me. A whole nother topic is how I'm sharing these books on social media. Like they're not digital content, but they're becoming digital content. And how does that all interact with all the people who are seeing it and everything? But I do see a lot of parallels to our social media habits or practices, like within these books. And actually, a common comment that I get on Instagram for some books, people say, oh, that person would have a really cool Instagram account, or that person would have a really good Pinterest account, just based on what they put together in their book, 100 or more years ago.
And now, this was really interesting, and I thought it was amazing to see all of the different things that people chose to keep and how they chose to tell their stories. I really liked the one with the newspaper commentary that she kept clipping to make things really funny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're getting some comments of this is fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry for the little technical glitch there. I disappeared for a while, but I'm glad I was able to come back.
We have a question on how does one get started in scrapbooking? It looks like something my daughter might enjoy.
Yeah, I would say email me. If you want to email me that question, I can share a video link that helped me, like a person who's really into art journaling said, this is what you should start with. And I use that information to get my own supplies, starting with the basics. So yeah, if you want to email me, mandy@paperofthepast.com, I can send you that link. And if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to email me or contact me. Happy to talk about these books all day, every day.
And we will include that link in our follow-up email as well. That way people can, reach out and ask their questions as they might, occur later. Because I know sometimes we all have that thought of, oh, I want to add this, or I have a question later on.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you being with us here today, Ms. Ross. And thank you so much for showing us your beautiful collection. And hopefully you will get a lot of new Instagram followers out of this. I know you've at least got one in me. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you.
And continue scrapbooking, guys. Happy National Scrapbooking Month. Next week, we are going to be meeting again, same time, 10 a.m. here at the Life program. And we are going to have a program with Children's Library Specialist Leah Stark. Maui no Kauai, which is Maui is the best, and we're going to be talking about Maui and a bit about the other Hawaiian islands. So do join us at that time, and thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.